Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine, and we are very excited to be hosting George Packer here again, this time to talk about his new novel, The Emergency. No doubt many of you are familiar with George's work as an author, a playwright, and a journalist. For 15 years, from 2003 to 2018, he was a staff writer for The New Yorker, and he now writes for The Atlantic. In his nonfiction books, George has taken on big and important subjects. Blood of the Liberals, which came out 2.5 decades ago, explored American liberalism through the history of George's own activist family. His 2005 work, The Assassin's Gate, was a Pulitzer finalist and remains a seminal study of how the U.S. got into the Iraq War and ensnared in a counterinsurgency campaign that American leaders failed to anticipate. The Unwinding, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2013, addressed the social, political, and economic upheavals in the United States over the previous several decades through the stories of various individuals from across the country. His biography of Richard Holbrooke, Our Man, told the life story of one of the most legendary and complex figures in the history of U.S. diplomacy over the past half century. And 4 years ago, in Last Best Hope, George examined America's divisions, its current instability, and what he argued had been the loss here of the art of self-government. With his new book, George returns to fiction. I say returns because he wrote a couple of novels back in the 1990s, The Half Man and Central Square. But even in inventing this story, George remains preoccupied with themes of a society crumbling, factions rebelling, and opposing forces warring. As one reviewer wrote, George has funneled his collected observations of a broken America into a dystopian allegory. It's one in which a fictional nation is split between largely urban and educated burghers, rural and rough-hewn yeomen, and roving strangers who are caught in the middle. The central plot revolves around a surgeon who, because of a misstep during an operation, is suspended from the hospital where he works, and with his 14-year-old daughter heads off on a risky mission into the countryside just as the conflict between the Burghers and Yeomen is reaching a crisis. George, who previously edited a 2-volume edition of essays by George Orwell, understands the power of allegory, and his visionary novel addresses what it means to live in a time of division and disruption. A rave review in Publishers Weekly said George, quote, writes with spare elegance and mounting urgency, and while the depictions of rising class and intergenerational conflicts have clear parallels in real-world matters, the novel never loses its taut, dramatic edge. It's a knockout. Moderating this evening's discussion, we're fortunate to have the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeff Goldberg. What Jeff has been doing with the magazine in recent years is itself one of the most exciting stories in journalism. He's been adding great talent, picking up journalists who've left the Washington Post and other publications. Under his leadership, The Atlantic has won prizes, its first 3 Pulitzers in the magazine's history, and for 3 consecutive years, the National Magazine Award for General Excellence for News, Sports, and Entertainment. And lately, the magazine has set new records for subscriptions. One of the things Jeff loves, in addition to editing the magazine, is turning up here at P&P to moderate book talks for his writers. So please join me in welcoming George Packer and Jeff Goldberg.
Thank you. That is true. That's my
Thank you.
favorite thing, is coming to P&P, finding out how many points I have. It's never enough, Brad. You think you'd like throw in a few more points? You guys don't. You can't believe how much I get paid for doing these things. Yeah. Every time I come in here, I rearrange the magazine section to make sure that the Atlantic is in place. And now when he knows I'm coming, he actually puts them out much more visibly than they usually are, and so I don't complain. But enough about us. Um, this is George. You've been here probably 5 or 6 times, right?
A few times. It is the best bookstore in America.
He says that.
And I don't say
literally
that
says that
everywhere.
to all
I
the
do
girls.
not.
No. I've heard
and
him
not
do
only
that.
do I say it, it is said to me whenever I say, yeah, I'm going to be at Politics and Prose for the book launch. Oh, that's the best bookstore in America.
Oh, it is the best bookstore in America, and it's also the closest to my house. That's the most useful aspect of Politics.
That's
and
why
Prose.
you're doing
That's
these events.
It's my
I
favorite
get it.
bookstore within walking distance. George, not only did I just bought this retail, by the way. You're welcome. But I've read it. It is excellent. I'm not used to interviewing you about fiction, actually. So why don't you do something pretty basic and read a bit, read something that gives people a sense of the sense of where you're going with this, and then talk a little bit about the story without giving too much away.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff, for doing this. I know you do it for everyone, but it feels special when you do it for me. I'll just read from the first page of The Emergency, and then I'll just say what it's about, because it's very hard to talk about a novel unless the audience has just some clue. And I know you haven't read it. Don't pretend you have. You need to have a clue about what it's about before we can launch into a deep discussion of it. Looking back, Dr. Rustin realized that the emergency had been a long time coming. This was how empires of old that he had learned about in school fell, imperceptibly, then shockingly. Even with an enemy army gathering outside the walls, no one can believe that a way of life is about to end, or imagine the strange new life that will replace it. Reports of an impasse at the top of government reached the provinces like word of some far-off, slow-moving threat, an outbreak of a new disease halfway around the world. The standoff dragged on for weeks, paralyzing imperial functions. But even news of street fighting in the capital, between mobs armed with nail-studded clubs and iron bars, made little impression on burghers in the city by the river, amid the high drama of exams week. Selva, the older Rustin child, was sitting for hers, and the family was much too distracted to notice that the empire was collapsing. And then, one day in late spring, a week after exam results were announced across the empire, the ruling elite fled the capital. In the city by the river, local officials abandoned their posts, police disappeared from the streets, communications across the region went down, and the evening verity never arrived. It was the start of the emergency. That night at dinner, sitting at the head of the table, Dr. Rustin informed his family of the situation. Annabelle gave her husband the satisfaction of bringing the news and pretended that she didn't already know. "We'll go about our normal lives," he said. "These things never last." "Is there going to be a war?" Pan, their 8-year-old son, asked. His father laughed. "Are you thinking of enlisting?" "What if they cancel the next round of exams?" Selva asked. "I've been working so hard." "You've done so well," Rustin said. "Don't worry, just keep studying." "Are you sure this won't last, Hugo?" Annabelle asked. Rustin reached across the table for his wife's slender hand. "Doesn't everything turn out okay for us?" The next morning, he left for the Imperial College Hospital as usual, not out of personal courage or civic duty, but because he was too rational to imagine all that could go wrong. The streets were nearly empty, and the tram wasn't running. The few people he met avoided eye contact, and as Rustin walked along the silent tracks, he suddenly understood in his central nervous system that only the threat of consequences from higher authority had allowed him to share a street or tram without fear of violent death. Now anyone could do anything. All that mattered was whether this person approaching intended to kill him. So that's the setup. And the question is, where are we? Who are these people? What period is this? And I want you not to know. I want you to have to begin to imagine from the very start that we're in some other time and some other place. And I never name it because I want to, in a sense, estrange you from our world, to put you in a world that is in some sense abstracted. So it's just the empire. It's never named. It's the city by the river. It's never named. Now, some things are quite concrete. We know the names of this family. It seems like a family. There's a husband, a wife, 2 children, and an empire that has collapsed. And the way I put it a little later in that chapter is it collapsed of boredom. It died of boredom and loss of faith in itself. And for me, this is one explanation of what the hell is happening in our country. Maybe we have just bored ourselves to death with our prosperity, our stability, our reigning as the superpower. And what happens when all the structures grow so fragile that they, like a marriage that suddenly runs out of love, it just collapses? Well, that's the story that I tell in The Emergency. It's about this doctor who, as Brad mentioned, is disgraced at his hospital because things have changed. Things with this collapse of the empire, with the emergency that follows, suddenly there's a new order. It's basically the young taking over with a new idea about what the good is, what the best form of government is, how we should all live. And he is a middle-aged, let's call him a liberal, who has a hard time getting used to it. And his relationship with his daughter, with his wife, with his family, with his city, and eventually, when they go out into the countryside with the other group, the yeomen, the rural people, all of this makes him almost homeless. He no longer knows who he is, where he belongs, what the new order means, what's happening to his daughter, which is kind of the main relationship, I think, in the novel. And they go off on this quixotic, ill-fated trip into the countryside, not understanding that things have gotten dangerous and that the 2 groups, the Burghers and Yeomen, have begun to move into a state of sort of civil war. And so it becomes a bit of a thriller when they get out into the countryside. But that's the premise. And we can talk about why an allegory, why not just write about America today. I have some answers, but Jeff is getting restless there, so I want to give him a chance to ask me a question.
No, I've been daydreaming. I'm sorry. No. I'm with him a lot. It's fine. I know what he's going to say. So it's a great. I want to come back to the decision to anonymize, even in historical period, anonymize the book. But I want to ask you about the origins of this. I mean, superficially, it's pretty easy to figure out what got you started thinking about this. But you started coming to me a couple of years ago, and I remember this because it felt organic rather than contrived. You're like, I have this idea that I have to do. And then the idea became I have a book that I have to write. I don't want to take any time off, but I kept remembering the phrase, I have to do this. This is obviously coinciding with the second half of the Biden term, yes, I think, right?
That's right.
There's some welling anxiety on your part and a lot of people's part. What is if you can even pinpoint it, what was that moment after which you texted me or called me and said, I'm sure you don't want to hear this, but I'd like to go off and write yet another book. What was that? What was the thing that triggered this?
And you
I don't have no. This is not passive aggressive. This is just me.
No, and you
Sorry.
you kindly did not say absolutely not. Why should
never would.
Why should I tolerate
Politics
that?
and Prose needs new books all the time.
Exactly.
Atlantic's got to make them.
And I didn't stop writing for the Atlantic, but I combined writing journalism with fiction, which was an interesting split brain activity. Basically, fiction took place early in the morning without the internet. That was the key. Turn off the internet, put my phone 2 rooms away. So if I felt that anxious impulse to grab it and distract myself with it, I would actually have to get up out of my chair and walk 2 rooms, which is just enough to let my willpower take over and not do it.
Famous long distance runner George Packer.
2 rooms. That's pretty. Now in a few years it'll be 1 room, I think. No, what I think 2 things, Jeff. One was during and after the pandemics, we have a place in rural New York, in farm country, upstate, that we spent a lot of time at during the pandemic, and I kept going up there a lot after. And this trip from the city, from New York City to farm country, began to feel like a journey into another world.
Did something specific happen, or is just the fading away of the contrivances of?
Well, I remember one particular conversation with my Trump-loving next-door neighbor, a farmer, in which I realized when we got to the point where Mark Milley needed to be publicly executed, that I had to, first of all, never, ever have that conversation with him again, because I want to stay on good terms with him, and I actually like the guy. But also the sense that he is seeing the world in a completely different way, with a different set of alternative facts, as they've been called. And even the landscape began to feel like another country, even though it's a normal small town rural American landscape. The sense of 2 realities became overwhelming, and going back and forth suddenly put in my head the idea of a city man, having to go into the countryside and finding that it's not what he thought. It's not what it used to be. It's no longer a place where he's welcome. It's now a place where he is maybe the enemy, and it's dangerous. And his liberal naivete about, well, we'll talk and we'll understand each other, fails him. And what happens then? Well, that was like the emotional, but also almost like the physical, geographic impetus to write a story. And that's a story. That did not feel like journalism to me.
When did you, without reading too much into it, when did you come to the realization, and it might be on one of these drives, but maybe it's before, come to the realization that America was coming apart? Maybe not even dramatically, but the seams were loosening, or the seams that you never even had to think about because they were just so tight, were loosening.
Well, I did write this book called The Unwinding, which is almost a description of what you've just said. So I knew the social contract, the sense of belonging to a common country with a common identity was already loosening, but I didn't know how far it could go. And I think January 6th, 2021 was a watershed in many ways. And one way it was a watershed was that for about 2 or 3 news cycles, there was a palpable consensus that this was a terrible thing, an attack on democracy that had to be rejected. And I naively thought, finally, something has happened. We all saw it with our eyes. Jeff was actually there in person because he's a kind
Not
of...
on either team.
Not on either team. He was there as a journalist with a certain amount of guts. I thought, that's it. we now have a common understanding. There's a threat to democracy. The American people believe in democracy. They will come together around at least a condemnation of this. That lasted 72 hours and immediately began to disintegrate into the usual channels of partisanship, lies, conspiracy theories. And within a few months, there was a whole other version, which was that the FBI had entrapped these peaceful patriots into coming and going into the people's house where they had every right to be, blah, blah, blah. You know the story. That, I don't know, that kind of shattered some of my faith in the power of facts to establish a common reality. And when you get to that point as a journalist, it's a bit of a crisis. You can understand that's an existential crisis. What do? Well, you keep reporting facts. You don't stop. You never stop. But I thought, maybe I need to get at this reality in a way that doesn't depend on facts and find a deeper truth by getting as far away from it as possible, creating a world that is another world.
I have read, and continue to read a lot of dystopian fiction because my day job isn't ridiculous enough, right? I mean, the things that we're seeing around ourselves are apparently not entertaining enough for me. But I've read a lot, as have you. One of the remarkable things about this book is that, though it's you go down well-worn literary paths, there's an originality to this. I was very pleased and relieved and happy to see that. But there are many people up to and including the great one, George Orwell, have tried to, through fiction, show what a radical or a violent unwinding looks like. My question is, along the way, as this is germinating in you, did you have guideposts? Was it Huxley? Was it Octavia Butler? Is it George Orwell? Is it nothing? Maybe you don't read like I read.
No, I do. Obsessively.
That's why we're gloomy Gus and
we're a lot of fun
over here.
Yeah, just wait till a couple of drinks happen. No, of course I read it obsessively. 1984, which I read in high school and didn't really get because I was growing up in mellow California in the 70s and Big Brother and the Thought Police. No, life is cool. What are you talking about? And then I reread it and wrote a piece for The Atlantic a few years back. And I realized this is an unforgettable nightmare and a great work of art. And to combine those two, a political vision and a great work of art, is such a hard thing to do, but it's a great goal to strive for. And then there's other books. There's The Handmaid's Tale, of course, which I hadn't read, and I read it in order to read a more contemporary dystopia. There's The Plague. There's James Coetzee's Waiting for the Barbarians, which is a wonderful book. So there's a whole literature of this. But what's different about The Emergency is there is no Big Brother. There is no thought police who arrest and torture people. There are thought police, but they're your neighbors. They're your colleagues. They're your children. And I don't have an apparatus of totalitarian terror because I don't think that's our problem. I think our problem, of course, we have a government that is becoming more and more authoritarian, as I've written recently in The Atlantic, but I think the core problem is a deep social divide that made Trump possible. And so instead of, my son once asked me, is there a demagogue in your novel? And I immediately panicked and thought, no, do I need one? Maybe I need a demagogue. It was too late. I couldn't rewrite it. I think it's better not to have one. It's, again, getting at what's universally human about our situation by not using the familiar names, the familiar words, the familiar people, and instead putting it into this indeterminate time and place that maybe makes our reality more intelligible than simply inhaling the news every day. And so rather than a demagogue, there is deep division between the two groups, the urban burghers and the rural yeomen, and within families, because that's another place where I see this generational chasm opening up, so that my world, the world that I assumed would always be our world, is not the world that my children are growing up into, and that they have had to explain to me because I don't understand it.
So something that's interesting about that, I want to get back to the divide, because I think emotionally it's the divide between father and daughter that animates the work. But I'm very interested in understanding the role cancellation plays, social cancellation or social death plays in this. And the reason that's interesting is because there's no social media in this as social media as we understand it. Talk about how people get canceled in this universe, and how it happens without social media, or maybe there is a kind of social media going on that I'm not fully seeing.
No, I think you're right. So one decision I made was there's no digital technology here. The fundamental thing that makes our era different from all eras that have come before, I've just banished, because it makes it too easy to draw these one-to-one comparisons and then to think, I get it. Yeah, I understand. No, there's no screens, there's no phones. What there is a new movement in the city of the young called Together. It's a sort of ideological, philosophical, utopian movement. And in order
It was originally called Mamdani, weirdly.
Right.
Yeah. By happenstance.
And not a name I knew when I started writing. But of course, the youthful impulse toward utopianism it's eternal. It's always been there. It's the 60s, it's the 30s, it's eternal. In this case, it's it's a rejection of the father's world. The daughter telling the father, "You failed me by not preparing me for this collapse of all that we've known. And so why should I listen to anything you have to say?" And the father and daughter had been very close. She was the apple of his eye. She was this star student. She was going to go into the guild of medicine and follow in her father's footsteps at age 14. And suddenly it all disappears. And what does she do? She gets involved in Together, which is this sort of self-organized movement without a hierarchy, without leaders. But what they have is this daily meeting in the main square of the city called We Are One, where instead of everyone scrolling through their phone, there's a kind of choral decision-making where a question is asked, the question spreads through the crowd, sort of by echo, and the crowd has to answer it. And somehow, everyone has the same answer at the same moment. Now, how does that happen? They're not given the answer. No one is forcing the answer on them, but they all kind of know what the answer should be, and they say it simultaneously. And to me, this is sort of the nightmare of social media, where a kind of an authoritative answer arrives on someone's account, and it just spreads like wildfire. And suddenly, if you are not with it, you will find yourself very alone. Not necessarily, you won't be executed, but you'll be socially executed. You will lose your status. You will find yourself sort of stranded in your own little lonely world. And that, in some ways, is more frightening than state censorship, because we all depend on social acceptance in our group. And once you lose it, it's you don't know who you are. And this happens to the doctor. That's the sort of the impetus of the plot. He is, to use our terminology, a word I would never use in the novel because I'm trying to get away from our terminology, he is canceled. and he has to decide, how am I going to redeem myself in the eyes of my daughter, my family, and my community?
I mean, one of a particular power your writing has is that you go right, and we'll talk for a minute about where we are as a country. You also, your critiques go left as well in your writing, left authoritarianism and right authoritarianism. A lot of this book, especially given the moment that we're in, seems motivated by an anxiety about left the mores and folkways of left authoritarianism. I sometimes feel that you're, while acknowledging the people who have power right now come from the right side of the authoritarian fence, I sometimes feel that the left side is more personal for you. Is that fair?
Well, that's where I live. That's my community. So when I am canceled or fear being canceled, that activates my nervous system in a way that the right just can't do. I mean, they can tell me, as Breitbart apparently has done, that I am planning on killing the president because I've written in the Atlantic that we're living under an authoritarian ruler. Apparently, Breitbart now thinks that means I'm a potential threat to the president. That doesn't, in some ways, bother
I'm going to tell
me.
Breitbart that he won't even walk 2 rooms to get his phone.
Exactly.
By the way. Yeah.
My wife had to inform me about this. No, that doesn't bother me in the same way that rejection by the left bothers me, because that's more my community. But let's tell the audience, the story takes you into the countryside, and what's happening out there. There's also a youth rebellion going on, and the youth rebellion in the countryside, these farm boys, is a different kind. It's not progressive, utopian, egalitarian. It's backward looking. It's kind of primitive. It's a form of animal worship and worship of strength, male strength. And these farm boys are on the farm of one of this key family that the doctor knows, training for some military operation that is not quite understood, and following their own new philosophy, which is called dirt thought, which is essentially anti-intellectual, almost anti-words. They don't trust words. What they trust is the body and strength. And you can see where this might have some relation to things happening on the right in our country. But what I've done is taken these left and right impulses, what we now call wokeness and MAGA, and sort of mythologize them, turn them into something much more unreal and almost like folk tales. And that way, I hope you can see them maybe more clearly than if I'm simply talking directly about Bronze Age pervert or Black Lives Matter. Instead, I'm not using any of those terms. I'm taking you into a more mythic realm, which has these obvious resemblances.
And part of the challenge for the reader, I felt this as the reader, is I eventually stopped trying to say, oh, he's referring to the Harper's letter now, or he's referring to X or Y or Z. It is its own world, and you successfully create that. I do have one before. I wanted to talk about politics for a minute, because obviously many of you or all of you read George on Our Moment. But I wanted to ask you, and it's something that would hang me up, I think. It's, you're writing in the tradition of Orwell. You've edited volumes of Orwell. It's, to me, how did you get over the hump of saying, you know what, I'm going to try to semi-consciously do something that my hero had done? I would have a hard time doing that. I think it succeeds, but I'm wondering how you thought about this book in relationship to the obvious, your obvious North Star.
By acknowledging I'm going to fail. I will fail if that is the goal, and I accept it. I embrace it. I will try to learn from 1984. I even bought a very expensive facsimile of an early manuscript with Orwell's handwriting showing all the changes he was making, which was pretty fascinating because some of those sentences were pretty bad actually in their first draft, which is kind of a relief. But really, it was by finally putting it aside and plunging into what I had begun. You've kind of committed yourself. You've started a story. You have come to identify pretty deeply with these characters. And Orwell never wrote from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl. I've done that. It was really intimidating to set out in part 2 of the novel through the daughter's point of view. But it was crucial because suddenly we see the father critically through his daughter's eyes as the story moves into the countryside. And all those decisions and inventions take over, and eventually you're in your own work, you're in your own world, and you're no longer keeping one eye on a master who you could never possibly aspire to.
You did write this quick. It did seem to pour
2
out.
years. 2 years. That's
but very part time in the
part time. 2 years. It was I have to say, those first 2 novels that Brad mentioned were not happy experiences. You haven't heard of them, right? My mother read them. A few friends. This was.
Did your mother like them?
His
mother was a famous writing teacher.
No, she wasn't. She was a famous writing teacher who could crush me with her commentary, and I stopped showing her my work because of that. And she, I'm sad to say, had descended into Alzheimer's before she could crush me with this one, which might have helped me to write it. It was a joy to write. It was exhilarating because I was every morning going back into this world that didn't exist and that required my imagination. And the weirder, the better. That was what I thought. The weirder, the better. Follow intuition. It may seem incomprehensible. See where it goes. And I'm a very controlled writer. And in this case, I just said, you have to let go and follow those little dreams that keep coming to you, and trust that they will lead you to the right place. So it was
as a
actually
segue to today, what book, Orwell, Huxley, Thomas Pynchon, I don't know, is there a single novel that right now captures the feeling of this moment to you?
a contemporary novel, obviously.
Any novel that you've read that reminds that says to you, oh, this is what I think of Pynchon a lot, but it doesn't have to be Pynchon. Somebody who's like someone who's the vibrations are the same as this moment.
I mean, you could say maybe The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, which is not dystopia, it's sort of a historical counterfactual. That's a different kind of novel. You're in the America of 1940, it's just that Charles Lindbergh is president, which is a brilliant conceit. I'll have to think about it. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Talk a little bit about where we are right now. If there's a continuum of authoritarianism, where are we on that continuum in your view?
One thing I want to mention about following intuition is at the end of the book, civil war has broken out between these two groups. And the yeomen have found this weapon of war, have invented it, that no one has ever used in history. And it's called the shitapult, which is what you might think it is. And it's a devastating weapon because it basically brings everyone to the lowest level. It's a kind of nihilistic. It's not even an attempt to kill people. It's an attempt to demoralize. And my editor wondered if that was maybe a bit over the top. And then suddenly, like a month ago, the White House releases an AI video. And it turns out I had somehow entered the president's lower mind. And he was dreaming the same dream that I was dreaming, which really freaked me out. But it also told me, trust the intuition. It will get you to where reality is going to be. Because in America, we all know there's no way you can out imagine reality. Reality will beat you every time, and Trump beat me. Where are we? At the end of the novel, the doctor has had his rather complacent form of liberal humanism put under maximum pressure by his daughter and then by society and events and violence. And it's been stripped down, but not destroyed. And I feel one analogy to today is we have had a moral collapse in this country. It takes all kinds of forms, including linguistic collapse. The way our leaders talk, I find, shows a kind of corrosive, amorality. What I want is to start again with the basic, call it common decency, common humanity, and go from there, rather than thinking, what's the right political strategy? Of course we have to think about that. Everyone who's in politics needs to think, should the opposition move to the left or the center? Should this and that? That's not what I'm thinking about these days. What I'm thinking about is we need a moral regeneration before we can mend this tear that has opened up the country.
You think that's likely to happen?
I think it depends on each of us. It's an individual act, and then it becomes a collective act. I think it does require decency from our leaders. It requires the taming of our technology so that it stops bringing out the worst in us. But it requires a kind of willful decision on each of our parts to not use the shitapult, to not let that be the weapon. And it's hard because you think, well, but they'll kill me if I don't use the shitapult. They're after me. Well, yes, but maybe there's a way to survive and remain a decent human being. I know that sounds horribly trite as I hear myself speaking, but that was the mood I was in when I finished the novel.
I feel that was a very eloquent response that didn't actually address my question.
Where are we?
Yeah, just politically.
Where
But
are we
no. This is the most important question. It's, it is not true, as intelligent people know, that frogs let themselves be boiled. They do try to escape the pot, but let's assume that they didn't try to escape the pot. Where are we in the boiling frog phase of American democracy right now? I mean, you've spent, the last 10 months, 12 months writing on that theme for us, nonfiction. How far, I don't want to use overly negative language, how far gone are we? But how far are we down a pit?
We have moved astonishingly fast. It's taken Trump 10 months to do what it took Orban 10 years to do, which means not establishing a Gestapo that can knock down everybody's door on the command of the leader. That's not what's happening. It's something more subtle, more corrosive. It's a combination of eliminating every check on his power one by one, whether it's the civil service, Congress, the media, which is still alive, but has been, through its own cowardice in some quarters, defanged. Business, universities, law firms, all of these centers of potential check on his power. The courts, well, maybe the lower courts are still kind of a place of democratic opposition, or at least sort of a break. The Supreme Court, I don't know. Right now, it doesn't feel like it's something I would bet on whenever it's a core question of presidential power, the Supreme Court, whether through decisions or through these emergency orders has given him what he wanted. So I look around and think, what are the checks on his power? Well, public opinion is the last one. Last week, public opinion had something to say, and it should have gotten the attention of the White House. Oh, maybe there is still a will to hang on to what makes us, what has always made us, for me, a country worth loving, which is democracy. But I worry a lot about next year. The Atlantic has a cover coming out about the ways in which the midterms might not be free and fair. There's a lot of ways. So there's a certain level of extraordinary vigilance required. And I think that more than I care to think about hangs on how those midterms play out. Not just who wins, but how they happen and whether they have the command the legitimacy in the eyes of the American people. But Jeff, you have a few thoughts about these things. Where are we?
We're at the point where people get to ask questions of you about the novel. He asked me a question. I'm not taking questions. I'm like the White House spokesman. I'm not taking questions. I'm the Pentagon press corps over here. I don't exist.
We're where I never thought we would be. Let's just put it that way. We should all be capable of being shocked and not just take anything for granted.
Yeah, I would say, and please line up at the mic. There's a microphone right over here. There's just one, right? And we want people to come talk into the microphone because it's being filmed. Actually, you know, it's interesting that the Pentagon, the defenestration of the Pentagon press corps, which of course can still report on the Pentagon, not just not from the Pentagon. And it's worth reminding you, talking about the 10-month issue, you know, what's been done in 10 months. It's worth reminding people that the press, the Pentagon press corps, is allowed to work in the Pentagon since the Pentagon became the headquarters of the Department of Defense. In other words, through the Truman and Eisenhower administrations, through Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush's, everybody seemed to find, well, this is okay. Not only was it okay, but this is what we do. We allow, in our democracy, we allow the press to be right next to the generals and say to them, so what are you guys doing? And then it was throwing them out, which will affect people's ability to report. We have great reporters doing this, but it still affects your ability. But the part that really struck me as right from the fiction of George Packer was the replacement of this press corps, serious press corps, with these kind of house poodle members of fake press organizations, including one run by Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, and who very specifically said, we're going into the Pentagon in order to report what they tell us is happening. I mean, this is we lose the habits of freedom and we lose the habits of accountability, then we're finished. And that's they're trying to make us lose the habit.
And I would say, while you're riveted to the news, as we all should be, fiction has the effect of exercising your imagination and, in a way, clarifying reality. You come back to the world from a novel and see it with clearer eyes because you've been forced to use your imagination. And everything happening in our country today requires the power of imagination to understand it, to anticipate it, and to see exactly what it means. Because I think the authoritarian powers count on our accepting every erosion of our freedom as normal. It's not that different. Feels the same. I walk my dog in the morning. No one's arresting me for that. So what's the big deal? Why are you using language like that? Because my imagination has seen a nightmare, and that nightmare actually resembles the world we're in. You just have to be refreshed. You have to be woken up to it, or else you begin to be lulled into a kind of sleepwalking into dictatorship.
Sir.
Good evening. Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for Politics and Prose having it. I have a question, and then I have
Just a question.
comment.
Just a question would be great.
It's important. In this book, is there an other group in it? You have the Burghers and the Yeomens. Because right now we're living, the others are the immigrants and the LGBT community and all that. And then
Yes,
So
let
the
me
other
answer your
part-
answer your question. They're called the strangers, and they are from beyond the mountains that are the border of the empire. And when the empire collapses and the border guards leave their posts, the strangers who are experiencing a kind of prolonged drought begin to come across the mountains through yeoman land, through the farm and hill country into the city, and their presence activates the violence that the whole plot is moving toward. So they are kind of the odd group out, but they're also the essential enzyme for the action.
And then, because it attaches to the question, in relation to the Orban and what's happening here, I think that ICE would be the Gestapo in our country right now because it's affecting so many people. And while you may walk your dog and not be in fear, I'm a Puerto Rican American citizen and I'm walking around with my passport because I'm Latino, but I also look Middle Eastern.
I think that's a key point, because one thing that authoritarianism counts on is most citizens not feeling it or experiencing it, and therefore not thinking it's a problem because it doesn't hit them directly. You don't have to make too many comparisons to the worst case scenario to say, yeah, I probably felt that way a little bit in 1933 because it wasn't me.
Thank you.
Yeah, next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I have two questions. One, you've discussed how American politics and recent events have inspired this book. Have any foreign events inspired the book? When you talk about a doctor being discredited, it reminds me of like what I've read about the Cultural Revolution in China.
Yeah. Well, it seemed, thank you, good question. I mean, I've done a lot of foreign reporting, but I find our situation so absorbing and obsessive, almost unhealthily so, that we forget not only that there's a world out there, but that the world has actually gone through a lot of this. You could say China, you could say Iran, you could say Hungary, Russia, Venezuela. And in a way, what's happening is the United States is moving in the direction of the rest of the world. We're becoming less exceptional and more like other countries. We are experiencing blood and soil nationalism. That sounds like something out of Europe. We're experiencing socialism on the left as a attractive ideology for young people. Has that happened in this country before? Maybe in the 30s, but did it elect a mayor of New York City? No. So in a way, yes, we are losing that precious idea that we're different, and that means all of these things should bring our thoughts to other countries and maybe learn some lessons from them.
You had one more?
Yeah.
Okay, make it quick, please.
My second question is less serious, but are you familiar with the meme "Nothing Ever Happens"?
Nothing ever happens?
Yeah.
I don't know that meme, but I'm not much of a social media guy. What does it mean?
It became popular in early 2020 after Qasem Soleimani was killed, in the sense that people were expecting World War III to happen, and then nothing happened.
Nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then shit happens.
Thank you.
By the way, just before this question, I wanted to note, you mentioned ICE. Just a little plug. We have a great story in the Atlantic, just that's very illuminating about ICE by Nick Miroff. And one of the interesting things about it, tell the president I'll call him back. Thanks. It's very interesting because he talks about how ICE actually was a kind of organization recently. I'm not going into the comparisons, historical or otherwise, but how ICE was an organization that was bureaucratic. Essentially, it was an appointment organization. You checked up on immigrants and worked on this, that, and then it becomes a kind of then it transmogrifies into what it is today. It's just a very interesting, complicated, illuminating story. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, thank you for being here. So I hear a lot of echoes of your previous works in the description that you gave, sort of smart America, just America coming from smart America and having some resentment from their
Real
parents.
America, yeah.
Real America.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a strain of free America anywhere in the book, sort of the Peter Thiel style libertarianism? That you
No. In a way, the novel, so for people who may not have read every word I've ever written, I wrote an essay in The Atlantic that was part of Last Best Hope, my previous book, that talked about the four Americas, the four narratives that dominated in my adult life. And free America is Reagan's America. It's libertarian. It's essentially the mantra of the Republican Party for decades. That's not in the book because I'm beginning from the premise that all of that has collapsed. The stable, kind of persistent, in the book it's called good development. That's the name of the system in the old empire. It's gone. The premise is what happens when the old world has disappeared. This is a deep feeling I have. The world I grew up in and expected to persist in is gone. When did that happen? How did that happen? Does that happen with every generation? I don't think so. I think this is something that happens kind of not that often in history. And so there's a sort of erasure of, so that I'm not trying to draw any one-to-one parallels between recent American politics and the present. But it would complicate things and distract things if I were looking for who's the Reaganite figure here. That kind of thinking would probably have killed it. I needed to simplify, boil things down, find weird alternatives for things. I'll give you an example. There's a workshop in the district called the workshop district of the city called the Better Humans Workshop. What's going on there? Well, this is something that's happening in the emergency. Young people are going into this workshop and having their image recreated in a kind of mask and metallic form, like a steampunk robot. It's not digital, but it's going to replace them eventually. It's going to record their voice, and it's essentially going to make them into the perfect version of themselves. The Better Humans Workshop. All the young people are lining up to have this done because there's this will to get rid of the old and even the old self, which is a burden, and instead to be to perfect yourself in a perfect world. Obviously, this is a little bit like AI, except there's no digital technology. And the only use of AI that I had in writing this novel was to ask ChatGPT, how would you have AI without computers? And damn it, ChatGPT had this great long answer with all these different models of, well, you could have tubes and wires and this and that. And yeah, I said, okay, go away now. I don't want you anywhere near my novel. Thank you for that answer.
Thank you. We have time for one more. One more. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi. I was just wondering if there's a role for opportunists in the collapse. In other words, those who, there's true believers, and there's that whole category of people who could go another way, but they see the opportunity and then they lend themselves to the forces that cause the collapse.
That's a great question. So the doctor who's the main character, Hugo Rustin, is the chief surgeon at this hospital. And after the emergency begins, everything changes at the hospital. The language changes, the hierarchies are gone. He's now being called by his first name in the operating room, which really bothers him. And his colleagues, especially those of his age, see which way the wind is blowing. It's blowing toward the young. And they're watching this and thinking, I'd better get on board or this is going to come after me. So you see the director of the hospital and especially the woman who's Hugo Rustin's deputy surgeon, they don't really believe in it, and he knows that because of some of the the way in which they talk about it in asides in the cafeteria. But they're not going to be foolish enough to let the young who've sort of become the new power in the hospital know that. And when he makes this mistake in the operating room that leads to this circle in which he's essentially being interrogated, he's looking to his colleagues for support, and they're not giving it to him because they're not going to risk their own necks. And he thinks, when he looks at the director, they're going to come for you too, which they do. But in the meantime, he makes all the mistakes you could make. He gets angry. He feels disrespected. He turns it into a much bigger argument about the whole philosophy of together. And by the end of this struggle session in a circle, he's finished. And his colleagues are looking at that and saying, that's not going to happen to me. So that's a great example of it's a good question about opportunism, because I think when there's rebellion and this kind of seismic change that separates the generations, people look for ways to survive.
Well, George is going to sign some books in a minute. And let me just thank Politics and Prose, Brad, everybody here, nice crowd for coming out. George is, he gets uncomfortable when I bring up Orwell and compare him to him, but you know, George is doing the thing that people like Orwell did, which is to hold up society and describe it as he actually sees it. He's one of the most honest people I know, and that's the best thing I could ever say about anyone.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it very much.